Welcome to the Law School Toolbox podcast. Today, we're talking about how to maintain a professional profile in the digital age where so much of your life is online, maybe for better or worse. Your Law School Toolbox host is Allison Monahan, that's me, and Lee Burgess. We're here to demystify the law school and early legal career experience so you'll be the best law student and lawyer you can be. Together, we're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. I also run the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review or rating on iTunes. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always reach us via the contact form on lawschooltoolbox.com, and we would love to hear from you. With that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Today we're talking about how to maintain a professional profile in the digital age where so much of your life is online. So Allison, first off, why do people need to be so careful here?
Well, to be honest, I think a lot of this is kind of just common sense, and somehow people forget that they should act like grown-ups and not be a total jerk. And by this, I don't even mean just law students. There was a really crazy story I heard a few years ago, which went viral on Above the Law, where there was a law firm partner who was on the Amtrak between, I think, Washington and New York, or New York and Boston, one of those lines that has a lot of eyes and ears who might be lawyers, might be law students. And this guy was talking loudly on his cell phone about who they should lay off by name. And, you just kind of wonder, what are you thinking at that point?
Yeah.
This is not your office. This is a public space. This is a train. People are listening to you. So, of course, someone happened to be on the train who was, I don't remember if they recorded it or they were taking detailed notes, but they sent this to Above the Law, and basically Above the Law published and knew before the people who were going to get fired the next day who they were. And you just think, are you crazy?
Yeah, I know. There's a similar story from the firm I worked at, not about layoffs, but that counsel was telling me that they were at a pool at a hotel, over a holiday break, and someone on opposing counsel was also there talking on their cell phone about the case, at the pool. And this guy and his wife were both lawyers, and were like, oh, well, and they were talking about, things that definitely should have been kept private. I think people do need to be careful about the idea that technology is really omnipresent, and, what you do out in the world, whether or not it be online or not, can be picked up by other people.
Right. And I think that's the point here. We'll talk in more detail about actual online things, but part of the point now is just it's so much easier for information to spread.
Yes.
I remember, my first law jobs, they were like, look, the elevator is not a private space. This is not your office. Mm-hmm. So you can't be talking about things in the elevator that relate to our clients, ever. It is a fireable offense to mention anything work-related, regardless of who you're talking to, in the elevator. And now it's so easy for things to go viral. If you are that person in the restaurant talking about the case, or in the elevator, or on the train, it's not just the 5 people around you who might be like, oh, that's kind of interesting. And maybe they tell 1 or 2 people. Mm-hmm. Within minutes, that could be all over the world. And you can be recorded. It could be a video. It doesn't just have to be like, oh, I heard this thing. It's photographs, it's videos, and they can all spread really quickly.
Yeah. You definitely have to be a little thoughtful if you're trying to talk about anything that should be private. I think you always have to have, an idea that probably what you're doing in a public place is not private. And in a way, the internet is kind of like a public place. What you do on the internet, not really private.
Yeah, and this applies in law school too. You're talking about the professor that you hate, and you don't know that their friend is standing beside of you in the elevator, even if you're not on campus. You just run into people in the craziest places. Mm-hmm. I remember once I was in a hotel in Hanoi in Vietnam, and these people were talking about a professor that had taught me in architecture school who was at that hotel. And it was just one of those moments where you're like, oh, I know her. And they're like, wait, what?
Oh, yeah. I've run into people I know on overnight trains in Spain in museums in different countries or in different cities. I mean, like, the world is very small in a lot of ways. And you have to
getting
keep that
smaller,
in mind. Yes.
every day.
Yes.
So I think, a good starting point is just be judicious about what you're talking about in public. I mean, think about what public is. There's another crazy story that I can't even tell all of because some of it's confidential, about someone who overheard something in a car where they had picked up people in the casual carpool, which is where people go. They get in line in Berkeley, they get in the car of a stranger, they drive across the bridge in the carpool lane, and then everyone goes off about their day. Someone in the car was talking about something that was, interesting information, and it was relevant to the law firm that I worked at.
Wow.
And it eventually got back to various people and things happened.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Uber Pool and like Lyft Pool and all of those pooled services too. You have to remember you're not alone in those cars.
Right, whether you're on your phone or whether you're making chit chat with other people. Mm-hmm. I just think you have to be cognizant of where this information could end up. And I mean, that's leaving aside completely all the information that you're voluntarily putting out there.
Right. That's very, very true.
Let's talk about that for a while.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I think the other thing that folks often forget when social media is concerned is some of us are careful to like set our profiles to private or things like that. But I think, they're social media outlets are constantly changing their privacy settings. Yep. And, I think oftentimes some of us have been surprised when like a post we have written, somebody's commenting on it that we've never heard of. And it's like, how did that person see that post? Well, exactly. Because like a friend commented on it and they can see their friend's comments and it like kind of this wave comes back and you're like, oh, wow, this single post has a lot of reach. Or something that has been an issue in some mom groups that I've been a part of online is people are just taking screenshots of conversations on Facebook or things like that and then reposting them publicly other places. And that is usually a faux pas if you're on some sort of closed online group, just so you know, like probably shouldn't do that.
Right. But again, you can't assume that someone's not doing that. Right.
I mean, you have to realize that, even something that's closed is only so closed. It's closed is where the internet's concerned. It's kind of like that elevator. It's like, it seems like you're safe in your office building, but you're kind of not when it comes to privacy.
Yeah, and actually even on Facebook, there are different types of groups. And I think sometimes people aren't clear on the distinction between, say, a private group and a closed group. I mean, I don't remember which is which. They sound pretty similar. But in one of them, everybody in the world can see who's a member of that group. And then the other, only the people who are actually in the group can see it. So you might, say that you are exploring some aspect of your life or personality that you might not want to be public, and you join a group that you think is private.
Right.
And it might not be. It might be that, well, nobody can post in it who's not in the group, but anyone can see who's in it. So if you don't want someone to know that you would be in that type of group, you probably shouldn't join. And you should be clear on that in advance, which type of group you're in.
Yeah. I mean, this is all just stuff you have to be thoughtful about. I mean, you can take screenshots of Instagram. You can take screenshots of just about anything.
I think even Snapchat.
Yeah. Like, in a way, it all feels very temporary, but some of this stuff can be very permanent. And this isn't to make you feel crazy that you can't be your authentic self. I mean, like, we all use social media, but you do have to just be thoughtful about what you share in that way. If it's something that you may never want to accidentally get, shared with somebody else, a group chat with your close friends on WhatsApp or another secure messaging service might make a lot more sense than using social media for stuff like that.
Sure, but also understand that those are all archived.
Fair point.
So, I mean, if you've ever worked in a law firm and done discovery, it really makes you a lot more paranoid about all these things because you start to understand, all the stuff we're looking through. I mean, for those who don't know, basically discovery is a company or a firm or whatever it is, an entity gets a request that says, we would like to have all of the email for Lee Burgess for the last 4 years. And here's why it's relevant. And typically, a judge is like, all right, well, Lee's the defendant here, so it seems relevant to me. And suddenly, some person or people, or now computers, algorithms, are going through literally everything that Lee has emailed in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
and it really makes you think differently about whether you would want that email to be produced in discovery.
Yeah.
Even things that aren't, for work accounts, it's astonishing the things that people say that either are not related to work or are directly related that you really can't believe they wrote down.
Or links they've shared. Oh my gosh. When I was doing doc review, I saw some kooky links to some pretty inappropriate stuff be shared on office emails.
Yeah, I saw one case somewhere, I don't remember where I worked, but it was like the guy was into like transvestite porn or something and was like downloading all the stuff at work. And it's just
interesting choice.
Yeah. And when all of that shows up in discovery, it's just like, whoa, okay.
Mm-hmm. You're like, not relevant, but still have to like.
Well, in this case, it was kind of relevant because I think it was like an employment discrimination case or something. But yeah, point being, probably not the best thing to be looking at on your work machine.
Mm-hmm.
I think the thing to keep in mind with any type of work environment is you don't own this information.
Yeah.
If it's a work email account, that whoever employs you is the owner of that account. And they can come and look at it basically anytime they want to. I can guarantee you it's being backed up, if only for technical reasons.
Right.
And you just really need to think about what you're sending out there.
Not to mention, if you work for a government entity, a lot of your emails are government property, and there can even be less privacy rights to it because of that. So you just need to be thoughtful about what you use work email for.
Right. And a lot of these entities are actually required to maintain records for a certain number of years. Mm-hmm. Say that you're working in a banking type of position. I'm pretty sure they have certain document retention requirements that are not optional.
Yeah.
Probably law firms too. I don't know.
Well, I think the other thing that we are all aware of, if you do use things like social media or Google, is how much information the algorithms seem to know about us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I read a super creepy article the other day that we will link to in the show notes. Have you ever, I don't know, maybe you gave them your phone number early on on Facebook, but if you've never given them your phone number, they nag you incessantly.
Yes.
Like, we need this for your security, blah, blah, blah. And I refuse to give it to them.
Me too, because I'm like, Facebook, you know everything else about me. Please do not know my phone number.
Yeah, well, it turns out, and also if you allow them to go through your contacts and that sort of thing, they're doing all this crazy stuff behind the scenes that I don't think people are really aware of. Where, say, for example, you have only logged into Facebook with your personal Gmail account, and you're very cognizant of that, and you're like, I don't have my work information anywhere. Say you have a sensitive position, and you just want to keep the two separate, which we'll talk about is probably a pretty good idea. Well, Facebook probably already knows your work email because they've uploaded the contacts of someone that has your personal email who also has your work email. Now they know your work email. Now they can use that to link you to other things. You never gave them permission for that.
Oh, that's really creepy.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's the article basically calls them shadow profiles that you have no control over. You don't actually authorize, and you can't even really get rid of it, because if one person has it, 2 people have it, 3 people have it, 10 people have it. All of those people would have to basically say, no, I'm not okay with you using these contacts. And they're not all going to do that.
Wow.
It's crazy.
That is super crazy. Yeah, I remember reading an article a while back about how creepy Facebook was with your cell phone. So I don't use their app on my phone. They don't have my phone number, and I only run it through the browser because I'm just like, at least they have less access to things on my phone if I run it through the browser.
One of these articles made the point that basically your phone number is the new social security number.
Oh my gosh.
It's basically as identifiable. And think about all the random people you put in your phone.
Right.
As soon as you do that, if you're allowing them to basically harvest your contacts in real time, the second you maybe go on, one date with someone and you want to be able to exchange WhatsApp messages so that you're both at the restaurant at the same time, boom, that entire universe just opened up.
And doesn't Facebook own WhatsApp?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
does that mean Facebook does have my phone number if I'm using WhatsApp?
I'm pretty sure they probably have your phone number one way or another.
Okay.
Because again, if somebody has of course they have your phone number, because if somebody has Like if I have your email address, which obviously I do, like you're
one would
of my
hope,
contacts,
right?
And they've got access to my contacts, which probably they do one way or another, even if I didn't actually give them that. Then of course they have your phone number.
Oh, that's really
you just didn't give
unsettling.
It to them.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, I mean, I think just being aware. It's a really interesting article. I mean, some of the examples that this article I think had were crazy. It was things like people who shared the same therapist.
Oh my gosh.
Like opposing counsel. One of them, I think, was like an adoptee and their adoptive, their real parent.
Oh my gosh.
Like crazy stuff
that
they basically figured out.
Huh.
And then they present it as like, oh, these are people you might know.
Yeah, that's
can you imagine?
Yeah, that is unsettling.
I mean, definitely, like I've had a situation, for example, like on LinkedIn, where they're like, oh, you might know this person. And I literally to this day cannot figure out how they know that I would know that person.
Mm-hmm.
It's like someone who lives halfway around the world. We are not connected in any particular way that I can ever think of. And they keep recommending them. I'm like, how do they know that I know this guy?
Yeah, that's really crazy.
Totally different spheres, and somehow they've connected it.
Oh, it's just because they know everything. The internet knows all.
Pretty much. I think that's pretty much a good assumption.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But, beyond like Facebook knowing everything about us, which is concerning in its own way, I think it is also important to realize that your online profile, especially if you are shifting from a student life to a professional life, is fair game. People are going to look you up.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, for hiring, for firing, you got to think before you tweet.
Yep. Which in this current political climate seems like some people don't do. But
right. And I think it's really easy to sort of think like, oh, I'm just talking to my, friends or people that I know on Twitter about this thing. And it's like, no, that's public.
Yeah.
And even if it's a private account, people still see it,
Right.
Like if you say something really inflammatory, there's nothing to stop someone from taking a screenshot and sending that to above the law.
Yeah.
They don't care if it has a little, lock beside of it. That's not their problem. You're the one who said it.
Yeah. Gosh, and I think it's tough right now with the political climate because I think a lot of inflammatory discussions on social media are happening. And between even folks that, well, I can just use an example from my own life right now, is that I posted something, not to get too political, but I'm pretty pro gun control. And there was another school shooting, and I posted something on my personal Facebook page about gun control, which is something I do quite often when things like this happen. And this conversation, and I know you read this post too, but I don't know if you saw, like the conversation that ensued became
I basically saw that it was like getting out of control and decided I did not want to wade into those comments.
Right. But I mean, it was like this one comment that started with some likes from my friends became this dialogue, and there were a number of people in this discussion. It was like someone I knew from college, somebody else I knew from college, like someone who's a friend of my husband's, that my husband's in this conversation and my mom is in this conversation. And, and it's like this dialogue, some of which maybe wasn't as respectful from certain parties as others, kind of all started because of this comment on social media. And it really was a great example again of how, something that you can post that you don't necessarily think can get fairly contentious amongst the people I know that share my social media.
Right. Well, I mean, I remember, I saw this yesterday and thought, whatever. I honestly don't even remember what you said because I thought it was pretty innocuous, something along the lines of like, wow, isn't it too bad that we have like more kids being killed in schools?
Right. Yeah. I think the post was, now is the time to talk about gun control. Actually, years ago is the time to talk about gun control. # moms demand action.
Yeah,
I'm
so
pretty
not exactly super inflammatory.
No, and it's, some could say like, why does that even make a difference? I don't know, because when, as a mom, I'm reading about, like hurt children, it's like one of the few things that small little things I can do other than support organizations like Everytown and Moms Demand Action. So it was just interesting to see it play out again about how the internet has this way of starting conversations and bringing people together from people who do not know each other into having these dialogues. And then what happened to that dialogue? If somebody took a screenshot of that dialogue and maybe somebody said something that they wouldn't want spread around. I mean, it is just interesting to kind of see how things can shift. And that was just kind of an interesting snapshot. I don't talk all that much politics on my Facebook page. But it was just an interesting reminder that in these political times, you never know even what some political comments can turn into on social media.
Well, it doesn't have to be political. There's another one that's happening in the last day or so with a friend of mine who made, again, like a pretty innocuous remark about something he didn't like at a restaurant. Like, just that he didn't like that, like what the server said, and it's just this thing that servers say, and he found it like a little bit annoying and whatever. You know, like, okay, fine. And it has spiraled into this like enormous discussion / fight between all these people who do not know each other. And the original guy is like in the middle of it, basically being like, hey, you know, like he's got people who run restaurants jumping in and being like, you guys are all idiots. And the people who are like, no, I hate this. And it's just like, oh my God, like, why are we all spending time on this?
I know. So, I mean, it's hard because on one hand, you don't want to be someone who's, you know, completely unengaged, because social media has a place. We can debate whether or not, I mean, it also is apparently making us all more depressed. I mean, there's plenty of research out there about that.
More distracted.
As well as more distracted.
Less productive.
Maybe there's a really good argument that you should just leave social media. But since that's probably not going to happen, you know, I think it is a little bit about deciding, you know, how you want to use social media and what you think it's for. And what other channels even do you have to share information that maybe would really feel a little more secure? I think it's a good thing to acknowledge that what we have online and on the internet, like you were saying, Allison, exists somewhere. It's backed up somewhere. Someone has that information and nothing's truly private. But, you know, I even have friends now who are using apps to share pictures of their new kids.
Right.
So there's an email that comes through with a picture, because she's choosing not to use social media to share pictures of her kids. So there are new alternatives for sharing information with your friend group, you know, group chats or whatever. But I think you just have to realize that the digital world is not private.
Right. I mean, legally speaking, you probably would have a better argument that you had an expectation of privacy in a closed group of 10 people than in a Facebook group, Facebook publicly.
Right.
Yeah, I think it's just a difficult thing, you know, and law schools tend to be places where maybe there's a private chat room and then people think that, oh, whatever I say there, you know, is just between me and my classmates. And then you hear about situations where, I think this is actually incoming undergraduates at Harvard who had their offers of admission revoked because they were sending around like racist and sexist memes in one of these groups. And it's like, that's not a private group. Like the university organized that. You don't think someone's monitoring it?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You just have to think about it. And it was interesting. I was at Allison. I don't even know if I told you that I did this on Monday, but I went and saw David Sedaris do a reading. And he was talking about how his partner refuses to get emails from him, and he doesn't like him to talk on the phone. So when David Sedaris travels, he has to write longhand letters to his partner, who lives most of the time in Europe, I think. But he was just even talking. This guy writes for a living, but he was talking about the difference of, you know, like sitting down with a pen and paper and like drafting a letter to talk about his day or to talk about things that had happened. And I thought it was so interesting because, you know, I mean, we're not that old. We're probably older than a lot of people who are listening to this podcast. But, I mean, I remember writing letters, and it's just such a more deliberate way of communicating that is so different than, you know, the email, the text, the Facebook post, the Instagram post, which is such an instant decision to share something.
Right. I mean, I think you've talked about in the work context, you know, that you've heard stories from older lawyers about like, wow, you know, it used to be when I got an inflammatory letter from opposing counsel, I had time to kind of take a step back and think about it. And my secretary printed it and I read it. And then if I wanted to respond, I had to like type up a response and then she proofread it. So now you get the email and then you just immediately write the email.
Right.
You know, there's that gap of like time to think is basically gone.
Yeah. And even, we were just communicating about a professional email that we were going to respond to somebody about. And that was, there are a few times where you and I will like send each other an email to be like, hey, do you think this is a good email? But even then it's all in the span of like a couple minutes. One of us drafts it and like shoots it off, and then we're like chatting about it. Then we do like make some edits, and then it's like a 5 to 10 minute process. Not
gotta get it out the door.
Right. It's not like a 24-hour process, of a response, because I feel like, whoa, if I take the time to like forward it to Allison so she can skim it first, like I'm behind the curve on getting back to somebody.
Yeah, but I think it's worth taking the time to, take a step back, take a breath, think about, would I want this to be on the front page of the New York Times, whatever it is that I'm sending out. I mean, there was an incident, I don't know if you're aware of this, yesterday, where this demand letter went viral on Twitter because it was so horribly done.
Oh.
And, this lawyer sitting in his office in Alabama, probably thought 10 people were going to read this. I mean, he probably should have thought more were going to read it than that, but certainly I don't think anyone anticipated when he mailed that it was going to take on the life that it did in a matter of hours.
Mm-hmm.
And, it probably literally was on the front page of the New York Times today. You just have to kind of, particularly in the legal profession, I think you have to develop that mindset of, do I want to hit send on this? Do I want to publish this? And not to make you paranoid, but just, basically you have to be a grown-up here.
Yeah, you need to be thoughtful.
Yeah. In terms of like practical things people do for social media, sometimes people have separate profiles. You have your personal one where you post your kids' photos, and you have your professional one where you talk about whatever you talk about.
What do you think about people using fake names? I know that Facebook tries to crack down on that, but
yeah, they don't like it. I know a lot of people who do it, and usually for pretty good reason.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a problem with that. Like if I know the person,
right.
Like pretty sure my sister has a fake name on Facebook, and I'm like, I know who she is. Like it doesn't bother me.
Right.
I think actually they should be a lot more flexible about that.
Mm-hmm.
That does make it a little bit hard to have different profiles, because technically I think you're in violation of their terms of service.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever, you can do what you want. But there have been cases where they've shut down profiles that didn't have people's real names on them.
Yeah. I think I had a friend who was who was like a coach, and he used like coach as his first name, and they like got mad about that.
It seems pretty random.
Mm-hmm.
I know people who've been hassled, and then other people who've had totally fake names for ages, and nobody's really cared at all.
Yeah, I feel like the fake name might be easier to pull off than like a word that an algorithm could find.
Right.
It's not real.
Sure. Yeah, that's true. Most people I know just have like random names.
Yeah.
They're like, that's not your actual name. But they have good reasons for doing it. Maybe they're a doctor or whatever. And that's the whole thing. It's like there are plenty of legitimate reasons that people would not want their actual name associated with a lot of this stuff. Maybe you're an activist.
Right.
There are lots and lots and lots of jobs, particularly in the legal space, where people might want to maintain that sort of separation. And I think particularly Facebook makes it really hard to do that.
Mm-hmm. I also know folks who really trim down who they share stuff with on different social media platforms.
Right.
Like my Instagram list is like much tighter than my Facebook list. No offense.
Well,
to
is
people.
yours actually like locked?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But you're on it, I think. So you're okay. I voted you in.
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I'm in the club.
You're in the club.
Yeah. If you're going to be posting personal photos that you don't want some employer possibly finding, again, on Instagram, like I don't use my real name on Instagram.
Yeah.
Part of the reason for that is when I was like online dating, it turned out they could actually match stuff up behind the scenes, and all sorts of creepy stuff was happening there.
Oh.
Where you weren't using your real name immediately, and people were still finding like Instagram profiles that have your, selfies all over them.
Oh, that makes me thankful I was internet dating like 10 years ago when it wasn't so sophisticated 10 years ago.
I think, this is one of those where you just have to, there are a lot of things going on that you probably don't realize are going on with your data.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah. Okay. So you can consider having multiple profiles. You consider using different, platforms for different things. You should really dig into your privacy settings. I think it makes sense to go through and check your Facebook privacy settings periodically, because they're constantly changing things.
And they're never making it more private.
No, that's a very good point.
anytime they make a change, it's never like, hey, we're going to make you more protected. It's always like, hey, by the way, we just opened up your entire life to the entire universe. You're cool with that, right?
Yeah. The other thing that was interesting is I recently went on and saw that you can see like what, I can't remember if it's what like groups or what kind of classifications of people that you've been listed in, because that's how they're doing some of their targeted advertising about like, and that you can actually remove some of that. But that is also disturbing and worth checking out.
Oh yeah. Like we've sometimes run Facebook ads and it's crazy what you can target by.
Yeah.
Crazy.
I've got to say that really creeps me out. Like, what you were able to find, like when you did a deep dive into Facebook ads, was a little creepy. Yeah.
We don't run them anymore. I find it too creepy.
I know. So don't look for us on Facebook. I mean, we do have Facebook pages, but yeah, we don't run Facebook ads because it is a little, I don't know. It felt like a little like 1984. Like, I'm not really sure. I don't know.
They're really intrusive and they know a lot about you. I mean, I had a friend from law school who was actually going into the advertising options and pulling out things that you were allowed to target by, you know, in terms of like specific interests in white supremacy or whatever it is. I mean, there is a ton of crazy stuff that you can find out from people's Facebook profiles, and it is very lightly kind of disguised. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. We can't even open like the Pandora's box of what's happening with advertising and the fake news that's coming through. I don't even want to use fake news. Propaganda that is coming through, because I just like don't want to use that term, but like propaganda that's coming through being planted in Facebook and how it's able to manipulate. I think, you know, it's funny. I was a media studies major in college, of course, before all of this stuff. And so much of what you focus on when studying media studies, at least when I was studying it, was media literacy. Like, what have we learned about consuming media? What have we learned? What are these kind of learned assumptions we have about advertising, about television, about movies? That idea with the sixth sense, where, you know, the first time you saw it, I mean, it's been out for a long time, so I'll spoil it. Don't pause if you don't want to know the ending. But this idea that, you know, that we fill in the gaps, you know, that there's never any dialogue between the two main characters, but our brains fill in the gaps because that's what media has taught us to do. And so, I guess I'd be kind of fascinated to know like how, you know, the new challenge is how do you teach media literacy when it comes to things like social media and, all these different news outlets and things like that, because the consumption, it's just such a new challenge, you know, and I think we are challenged ourselves to as consumers of all this information. But then as we add to the information stream, even just by posting your own stuff on social media, you are, you know, fanning the flame as well.
Well, and I think too, if you're thinking about it from the perspective of being a lawyer or potentially eventually being a lawyer, you know, it doesn't reflect well on you if you are retweeting or posting on Facebook or even liking or commenting on favorably articles that turn out to be clearly fake. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, we all know those people who are just like, oh God, like really, you're posting this stuff again?
Yeah.
And it just, I mean, all you really have as a professional is your credibility.
Yeah.
And you can destroy that pretty quickly if you're posting all these crazy conspiracy theories and not thinking twice about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's something to really be thoughtful about. And I think we talked about this in a recent podcast about, kind of job hunting and that process, but it's also, as you're joining a workforce, be thoughtful about who you add to your Facebook pages, you know, and it's probably good to make some decisions about where you're going to draw the line. Like, are you going to include coworkers on your social media, or are you not? And if you do, then you need to know that everything that you are posting on social media is being read by a coworker and thus could also be read by your boss. And I think that's something to be very wise about. Yeah.
The day that my law firm boss tried to add me as a friend on Facebook and I felt like I had to accept was pretty much the day it was like over. I was like, all right, well, that pretty much, even though we were friendly, it was just like, all right, well, you can't really say much at this point about anything.
I know.
Yeah, I mean, I think too, I mean, if you're talking about job hunting and that kind of thing and you're getting really paranoid here, you know, you don't have to go back and remove all of your social profiles. I mean, depending on what they are, it might not be the worst idea. You probably do want to go back and take down some of those or untag yourself in, you know, clearly drunk photos and stuff like that. Because the reality is most employers are probably going to look.
Yeah. I mean, I'll just say, we Google folks.
Well, not even on purpose
jobs.
sometimes.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's literally like, oh, they, say that they do this thing. Let's double check that that's true. Let's find their LinkedIn profile. And as soon as you find their LinkedIn profile, you're going to see 10 other things. Which brings me to my next point, which is really here in terms of job hunting and presenting a positive impression. Your best defense is a good offense. So you need to try to control what people are going to find when they Google you.
Yeah. I guess, so if you've not Googled yourself recently, you should Google yourself and find out.
And you should go in incognito mode because it knows who you are if you're in your own browser. So, if you want to totally, borrow your friend's computer or whatever, but if you go into incognito mode in most browsers, I think it's going to give you kind of a representative idea of what an average person Googling you is going to see.
And so what can you do if that doesn't look so great?
Well, I mean, the first question you've got to ask is like, is there anything I'd be concerned about here? Say, for example, you had an incident in college where you were arrested or something like that, and it's in the college newspaper. That's explainable, but you don't want it to be the second thing you find. So the goal here is really to push that down the page, preferably onto the second or the third page. So I think the first thing, you really need to keep your LinkedIn profile current and make that really professional. So a nice headshot, make sure it's entirely 100% consistent with any resume that you're sending around, because this is the first place people are going to go to look for you. Because the question is just, are they telling the truth? And also LinkedIn has really great SEO, so it's probably going to be basically the first thing that pops up. Yeah.
And hey, let's talk about easy ways to get a nice headshot.
Okay,
because I think this is such great advice because, hey, there's a new iPhone. Apparently the new,
the face model,
portrait.
Totally
the portrait.
Me out.
Yeah. But there's a new portraiture function. I don't know. But all you need is a nice background. White, maybe not so flattering for most folks. But a nice wall or a brick wall or
peachy,
a tree,
green, blue.
Yeah, any sort of nice wall. Just brush your hair if you're a woman and you want to put on a little makeup. That's cool. And just have your friend take your iPhone and go out and take some snapshots.
Look for good light. Good light.
Look for good light. Natural light, later in the day, warm glow. It's going to be great. The problem is that's a lot of people would prefer to do the cutout picture, somebody's got
passport.
your arms around you. No, I'm thinking the party picture.
Dance with my ex-boyfriend.
Right. Which when I see that on a LinkedIn profile, even if someone who's a law student, I'm kind of it's so easy now to just go have a decent picture. It doesn't have to be a super amazing professional headshot, which can be incredibly expensive. But it is good to just take the iPhone and go ahead and get some done. The other option is if you really want to have professional headshots done. Let's say you decide to start a blog, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Or you're going, you're oh, this picture is going to be on the internet. Oftentimes you can contact an art school and get an art student who sometimes needs to have portraitures done for a class, and you could do a trade with somebody. There are a lot of different options to try and get shots done. I just saw that now minted.com is doing super cheap family portraits where they're sending someone to meet you, and it's just it was $100 or something like that, which in the photography world is really cheap. So I don't even know if stuff like that is an option, but there are more options if you want more professional headshots done than I think many people realize, but you need to have something that looks professional.
Yeah, exactly. And also a lot of law schools will sometimes have those, or events conferences will often have a headshot area where you can go and get your hair and makeup done and get a quick headshot. Bar associations oftentimes will have stuff like that. If you keep your eyes out and you, for whatever reason, don't want just your phone photo, which those cameras are amazing now. I was at a photography workshop a week or two ago, and several people were saying that they think, the quality of what they're shooting on their iPhones is as high, if not higher, than what they're shooting on their $4,000 cameras.
Which is insane.
Yeah,
which is really insane.
That's great for your benefit. Because
it
again,
is.
you want to be consistent across platforms. So if you're trying to present a professional image, you don't want photos that don't look like each other.
Right. It's
Like,
true.
it's better. Trust us, it's so much easier once you have a nice headshot, because it's amazing how often you need that, actually.
It is true. But I also think it's to be aware that you want to make sure those headshots do look like you. If you do a radical change, like you all of a sudden had long hair and now you decide you're going to have short hair forever, you probably need some headshots that have short hair, because somebody's probably going to like be like, are you sure that's you? You know, I think that you want to make sure they at least look like you.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want people to be surprised when you walk in the door because you've decided to dye your hair purple.
Yeah.
It's like, you can do that, but there probably needs to be a little bit of warning.
Yeah. So I think there are a lot of options for headshots. And if anyone listening is thinking that they need headshots and you go to a law school and you're like a officer in a club, I would have loved it if one of the clubs on campus had done a headshot workshop. That would have been amazing.
For sure.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. And imagine, like, if you're a young photographer, and even if you're, say people are paying $20 or something for 2 digital images, if you get 20 or 30 people, I mean, that's quite a lot.
Yeah. And, art students.
I'm saying that you could live on that for a while. If you're
like if you're in a metropolitan area, you've got art students, or there even can be photography classes at at an undergrad campus that could be linked to your campus. I was at my high school reunion, and they actually had a high school student who took pictures, and they weren't bad. I'm just saying, the guy did not do a bad job.
Cameras are cheap these days. You can get really high quality.
Yeah. And, they didn't pay him very much, but he was better than not having a photographer there.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody has a camera these days.
Yeah.
So there's really no excuse for having a terrible headshot that's super out of date. It's just not necessary. All right. What else can you do on offense? Well, speaking of headshots, one thing we often encourage people to do is to write for other publications. So things like Medium, which you can just create an account and sign up for and write about stuff. Miss JD, for example, has a writer in residence program that I think they may be currently accepting applications for. But these are good ways to get your name out in a professional context. Maybe a blog at your school has something related that you can write about, or an online journal, that kind of thing. These show credibility.
Yeah. And if you have an area of interest, you can use some of these writings to explore that area. So, going back to my gun control example from earlier, if you are somebody who is interested in public policy work around like violence prevention, you could do a series on a blog about the research and learning you're doing about job opportunities in that realm. Like, what's the way to have the highest impact? Is it to go work for the legislature? Is it to work for a think tank? Is it to try and work for politicians and do elections? Like, I could just see a really interesting series on your own journey of looking at different job opportunities to invoke change. And if that's what you want to do with your life, and then you apply for a job at a think tank that works for gun control, and they find that stuff, that's going to give you a ton of credibility.
Right. And they don't even have to find it. You can put it on your resume.
Yeah.
I think in that sort of situation, that would be a time that you might want to consider actually having a blog or a website of your own. Mm-hmm. So, there are kind of 2 ways you can go with this. One is you can just have a personal website that's like leahburgess.com, which, if you haven't registered your own domain name, your own name as a domain, if it's still available, just go ahead and get it. There's really no reason not to.
Mine wasn't available when I changed my name. It was so sad.
Yeah, so, I have AllisonMonahan.com. I have no idea what's up there. Don't go look for it. But, if there's not a lot out on the internet about you, this is a good way where really all it has to be is, again, a nice looking headshot, a bio that basically mimics what you put on LinkedIn, probably a link to your LinkedIn, a link to any publications. It can be super simple, but it's just one more search result that shows, okay, Lee is a real person. This is what she looks like. It's consistent with these other photos. Her experience is consistent. Okay, I'm feeling confident. She's not catfishing me.
Yeah.
And then you can go beyond that if you have things you want to talk about, and really start a blog where it does become, you're thinking and learning about a certain topic. And that can really establish a lot of credibility. Of course, it takes time and energy, and you have to have something to say. But if you can do that, it can be really powerful.
Yeah, I think it's a way to shift the conversation and set yourself apart out from someone who maybe says they have a lot of interest but doesn't have evidence of the hours that you've put into it. I will say, if you are putting together a blog or something like that, and especially if you think that folks for job prospects are going to look for it, just make sure everything is proofread, or like hire a copywriter, which can also be done for not very expensive, but just make sure that it's clean and professional. If you're trying to clean up your professional profile and you're publishing stuff that's got a bunch of typos in it, that's not going to represent yourself very well. So just make sure it's being proofed by another person if proofing isn't your strong suit, but just be careful.
Right. And I think you have to differentiate here too between a professional blog where you are trying to make a good impression and be a professional, and a more personal blog. I mean, I have tons of friends who have, blogs about their kids or their cats or whatever it is. There you might want to consider using an alias or not using your full name. Mm-hmm. Not because there's anything wrong with it, but just because it can look a little unprofessional if you're spending like all this time and energy doing nothing but posting photos of your cute dog. I mean, I love your dog too, but I don't necessarily, as an employer, want to think about how much time you're spending doing that.
Mm-hmm. Your dog can have its own Instagram account.
Exactly. We have lots of people who have dog, And again, like maybe eventually somebody puts the pieces together on that and they figure out who you are. But that's not really so much the concern. The concern is really somebody typing in, Lee Burgess into Google, and the first 4 hits are about her dog blog.
Right.
And maybe that's a plus for some people, but most people are kind of be like, okay, is this what she's really passionate about? She's spending all of her time on this. Mm-hmm. I think there's a balance.
Yeah. But I like a good dog Instagram feed. So I will say, happy to see cute dog pictures, but that's different than, Googling somebody to work for me.
Yeah. It's just a question of, and this is the question I think you have to be asking yourself. Is this the impression you want to be presenting? Is there anything that you'd be concerned about here?
Yeah.
And one other thing, people, in addition to going incognito and Googling themselves, you can actually even set up a Google alert for yourself.
Yes.
So, if you're concerned about the vindictive ex publishing crazy stuff about you on the internet, you probably want to do that so that you will actually get an email that says, hey, a new page has just gone up talking about all this insane stuff that Lee did,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then, there are ways that you can deal with that, but you can't even think about dealing with it unless you know it's there.
Yeah. Yeah. So just do that. It's smart. And make sure you do a few different versions of your name, like with a middle name, without a middle name. Just set them all up. You never know. You never know what can pop up.
It's amazing the things that pop up on the internet.
Yeah.
It really is. I guess one final point on this. I guess my main takeaway here is just, you need to be aware of what you're putting out there, of what other people are putting out there, and of the impression it can give. The other thing to think about somewhat seriously is it's actually totally fine to just step away from all of this.
Yeah.
Cal Newport, who has written a number of books, is very successful. He's a professor. He just is basically like, you need to stop being on Twitter and you stop being on Facebook and stop being on all these things because it's so distracting and it's really harming people's productivity. And I think that's a valid point.
I think it's a really valid point. And if you're finding yourself distracted or having a hard time focusing when you study, you can always go on a diet. You don't have to quit it forever. Right. You can just take like a month off or a week off. But anytime you step away from something, it just reminds you where you were at that moment. And these bad habits, I don't know if you feel the same way about this, Allison, but anytime you quit a bad habit, it's it seems like it creeps back in sometimes. Maybe not something so extreme.
I remember you quit Facebook.
I did. I did. Yeah. Yeah. It was a diet. It was not it was not a lifestyle change. It was a diet, but
so you weren't really committed to it, basically.
Yeah. Basically. Well, it was a trial and I went back. But I think it is just interesting to kind of reset periodically. So, what are you going to lose? You can always block the site using one of the online apps where you can keep yourself from going to certain websites and stuff like that. If you feel like you really need to take a break.
Yeah, or you could just rechannel that energy, instead of mindlessly browsing through some of these feeds and possibly posting something that you're not proud of in the end. maybe you spend that time setting up your personal website or your personal blog or getting your headshot done.
Yeah.
If you just can't stay off the internet, you could channel it in a more productive direction and you'd probably be happier.
Yep. And with that, we're out of time. If you enjoyed, I know, also listen to our podcast because it's a good use of time.
Exactly.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Law School Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review and rating on iTunes. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Allison at lee@lawschooltoolbox.com or allison@lawschooltoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at lawschooltoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.